In this movie, we're going to look at post.php and look through each section and see the way that it works. To begin with, we start the session and load the common functions in forum.inc, and then we check to make sure the user's logged in. If they're not, we bounce them back to the entrance page right at the beginning of the website. If no thread ID has been specified, and this post is not the first post of a new thread, which it would be if, for instance, we had just come from the main page. Let's take a look at the thread listing, the main page, and if we roll our mouse over post new thread and then examine the address that comes up at the foot of the browser, the variable new thread is appended to the address post.php, and the value of new thread is set to true. So if it comes in with a new thread set to true, then a box is shown where the title of the thread can be added. However, what this condition is asking is, if there's no thread ID, then that's a problem unless we're creating new thread. And if those things are both false, then it bounces the user out. This function trims off any white space at the beginning or end of the body, white space being trailing space characters or line breaks or tab characters, and so on. If there is indeed a body has been submitted to this page, now the body variable is submitted down here. In this field here, in a form. And this is the post text that is entered by the user, and then when they submit the form calls itself. So if we go back up to the top, we can see that if the body variable has been set, then we must have just come from the form, in which case we need to add slashes to the body to escape any problem characters like apostrophes, then connect to the database, then the code will branch again depending on whether a post ID has been specified. Now if a post ID has already been specified, then we know that the user has come from a different place to arrive at this page. We know that the user has chosen to edit one of their posts and therefore is simply asking for the contents of the body field to be updated with the new data that they've just put in on the form. So that's what we do with this line. We use an update query to add the new data to our MySQL database. And provided that that works, we go on to set up the page post updated as the title, and we let the user know that they've updated their post as they wished, and we give them the links so that they can go back to either view the thread in context. The links are up here. View the thread in context, check out all the threads on the Great Debate, or log out and log in as a new user. Now, if no post ID has been delivered, then we move on to this branch. And once again, it immediately branches. If we're starting a new thread, then we have to set up a new record on the threads table. And so we use this query to insert a new record into the threads table. Then we have to find the thread ID of the new thread. And because thread ID is an auto increment field, the maximum thread ID will be the thread that we've just added to the table. So we register the thread ID variable and move on. Now, if the user was not posting a new thread, but simply posting a reply to an existing thread, then this is the point at which the two threads, the two paths rather, of the script rejoin. And we run an insert query, and this inserts the post that the user has just specified in the form at the foot of this script. Given that that goes through successfully, we then want to update the users table to increase the specific user who has just added the post, increase their total posts column by 1. Then we need to tell them that they've successfully added their post, and we can exit the script. Give them the links to go to wherever they want to in the site, and then exit. However, if the post ID variable is true, it says, but because up here we've had this if body, then this will only be reached if we've come to the page new. That is, this is the first time we've arrived at this page, and it hasn't just been called by itself through the HTML form at the foot of the script. If that's the case, then we need to connect to the database and select the particular post that's been requested. This condition here makes sure that the user is editing a post and not making a new post. However, the two paths rejoin at this curly bracket here, and then we add the title here, and there's a set of nested ternary conditions. This line may look a bit confusing, but it's essentially a set of ternary conditions that if a post ID is specified, we must be editing a post. However, if it's not, then another choice, if we're on a new thread, then we want to say that we're posting a new thread. If not, we want to say we're posting a reply. That's just a complicated way of, I should say, that's just a concise way of achieving something complex. We edit the mistake. We call the setup page function with title as both of the arguments. We then move on, and this set of lines will set up the part of the screen at which these options are given, the options to log out, and the username is mentioned. Then we have the HTML form, which we've already looked at briefly. Now there's one part over here on the actual submit part of the form. Oh, this is a separate form, this form down here. This is a single form that only contains the delete button. And this delete button will only be seen if we're not editing a thread, which is why we're not seeing it in the browser at the moment. So let's return to a thread listing. And we may have to log out, in fact, so that we can try this out. And we're going to log in as Mr. X. I know that Mr. X has a posting on Jabberwock, so because Mr. X is Mr. X, he can see his own post showing up, edit post. And in fact, because Mr. X is listed in the database as a moderator, he can also edit anyone else's post. But let's make him edit his own post for now. And as we can see, because we're editing a post, the delete button is shown. Now, when we click the delete button, we get this prompt to see if we're really sure that we want to remove the post. Let's do it. And we get the post deleted. If we return to our thread, go back into another post, also by Mr. X, try to delete, and then cancel, what we effectively have is a second chance if we decide we don't want to delete the post after we've hit the delete button by accident. And the way this is achieved is by serving a JavaScript, because once PHP has been submitted to the browser, to the server rather, all that comes out is HTML or script intended for client-side processing. There's no way we can achieve that kind of effect, the dialog box popping up, with pure PHP. So we have to use this little piece of JavaScript. What that does is it calls an onSubmit function, and that will return either true or false depending on whether the user has clicked yes or no on the pop-up box that appears. If we take a look at our forum.inc, you'll see that I've added the piece of JavaScript here. It doesn't really matter how this JavaScript works. That's outside the remit of this title. But the reason why I'm including this function is that it demonstrates the way that a JavaScript can be served just like any other HTML or any other part of the page from PHP. It's a useful way that client-side and server-side scripting can work together. I haven't used hardly any of it within this title, but it's something that you should be aware of. And in this case, this is a fairly safe piece of JavaScript to include, because if we disable JavaScripts, for instance, to simulate what would happen if the HTML with the embedded JavaScript arrives at a browser that can't handle JavaScript, then the button will simply presume that it should click through and delete the post without a prompt. So it will still work. It won't have the extra safety catch, but it will still work with our non-JavaScript enabled browser. So that is our post form, and that sums it up for our post.php script. And in our next movie, we're going to look at the last page in this dynamic website, which is kill.php, where users can remove their posts and moderators can remove both posts and threads.